What's up everybody, it's Rafi at ZURB, and this week we've got part 4 of our series on Panini. Now this time you're going to learn how to use Panini's helpers and data. So last week we talked about variables and front matter, so if you missed that one, go back and check that first, then come back here. So sometimes you need a little bit of help, and Panini's helpers are there to help you out. What I mean is, if you need to show or hide a specific partial or component based on the page or even the layout, Panini's helpers can take care of that for you. So we'll show you how to do that in the front matter, or we'll show you how to do that in the partial itself. And we'll also show you how to use Panini's data to import real content into your components to make it more of a dynamic website feel. So there's a lot of cool stuff that you could do with Panini's helpers and data. I'm going to show you how to do some of that right now. Alrighty, there's a lot to cover in this lesson, so I'm going to show you all the different helpers that are built into Panini and some of the standard handlebars helpers. And I'm also going to cover how to use the data with some of these helpers. So there's a lot to cover here. I'm going to just give you an intro of each different helper. And then in the next lesson, we're going to go into depth on how to really take those and use them in different ways and customize them and get some advanced examples. So let's hop over to our layout and we'll start there. So this is the layout that we created for our building blocks website, and this is actually a real project that is in the works, so you can see how that is coming along. So we have a bunch of components that our handlebar includes right here. So these are partials that we're including in our layout. Some of these will not be on every page. So we do have handlebars helpers that can help us nicely decide what goes on what page, or how to really handle some of the content and data that is being used on these. So one of the built-in handlebars helpers is the if helper. So to use a helper, we'll start with the handlebars, and then it begins with a hash. So the hash in front of the name of the helper. So in this case, we're using an if helper. So now we need to define a variable. So we're going to use this helper to wrap the hero, and we're going to decide whether or not the hero is shown on the page depending on the page or the use case. So we could do this in a few different ways. We're going to do it with data in front matter. So we need to close this if statement. So we have hash if and then the name of the variable. We're just calling it hero. You can call it anything you want. And it's wrapping the hero and being closed right here. So what this allows us to do is, if we save this, we can hop over to our page. Let's go to our home page. And now in the front matter, we can set hero to be true. So if we set this to be false, we can now decide that we don't want to show the hero. So you see the hero has disappeared. If we hop back over, we could set that to true, and then hop back over, and now the hero is back in the page. So now on a page-by-page basis, we can set whether or not we want the hero to show in the front matter. So that's one way to do it. Now that is built into handlebars, and there's also other helpers that are Panini specific, and it's based on the way that Panini handles pages. So another way to do this is the if page helper. So we need to make sure that the name matches on the opening and closing. And then the if page helper takes some arguments. So arguments need to be surrounded by parentheses. You can use single quotes or double quotes. Or sorry, not parentheses, but quotation marks. So single or double. And now we need to name a page. So this is looking for a name of a page. So I can do it this way. So if I'm on index, I want to show the hero. So now if I go here, this is no longer needed, because now I'm controlling this in my layout. So if I save that and hop back over to my example, you can see that the hero is in play there. Now, if I go back and change this to something else, let's say the other page I have is building block. Okay, so now it's no longer being called for on the home page. So you can see that the hero doesn't show. But if we switch over to the building block page, you can see that the hero is there. So this is another way to include or exclude a component based on the page. So you can also add multiple pages in here. So we could string both pages in here together with a space in between and another set of quotes. So just like this. And now I save that. If I hop back over to my example, not only is it showing on the building block page, but it's also going to show on the index page. So another very similar helper, but it is conditional, it's exclusive, is the unless page. So we can change this to unless page, and also here, unless page. And now we could say, okay, unless I'm on the page of index, show the hero. So that's going to exclude it from the index page and show it on every other page. So that's also useful. So if you're you want it to show on most pages but just exclude a few, then you might use the unless page. If you only want to show it on a few, then the if page helper would be more sensible. So you don't have to string a bunch of pages in here. So if we hop over, we can see that on the index page we don't have the hero, and then if we hop back over to the building block page, then we do. Awesome. So after you use the unless page, you might be wondering if there's ways to do things other than a page, like things like layout. So you can definitely do that. So we can do if layout and unless layout. So let's do if layout. So if layout looks like this, and then we need to choose a layout. So you need to make sure that these match opening and closing, or else you'll get an error. If layout, oops, there you go. So if layout default, then show the hero. If I want to exclude this hero portion for a different layout, I can definitely do that. So that's the if layout helper, and we can actually do something even a little bit more clever with the IfEqual helper. So I'm going to hop over to the Foundation website and show you how we would use the IfEqual helper. So the Foundation website has a footer, and the footer changes depending on the site that we're on. So right now we're on the main portion of the site. So the text here says Foundation. The links are specific to generic Foundation. And the color is this blue color. Now, if we hop into one of these other sections, you can see that the footer will change. So we have some different content that we wanted to show. So now the text has changed to Foundation for Sites. Some of these links have changed. The color is still the same. And then if we hop over to our email portion, so Foundation for Email is kind of like a little microsite of Foundation, and some of the styles have changed. So you can see that the background is now purple, the text is a little different, this paragraph is different, and then these links have changed. So one simple way to handle that is to use the IfEqual helper. So let's hop into the code and I'll show you how that's done. So we wanted to keep it all as one partial instead of having 3 or 4 different footers to maintain. It made sense to make it all in one footer file. So this one footer file allows us to inject not only different CSS depending on the layout. So this is a layout variable helper that will inject the name of the layout here. And we're using that in our CSS to set the background color. But we also have the IfEqual helper. So we're saying IfEqual layout, and then we're naming the parameter here, or the argument. So default is the name of the default layout, so it's going to use this text here. And then down below we have our layout is sites, and so now it's going to use this different text. And then for emails it's going to use this different text. And we can do that down the line with all these different links as well. So this is one way to organize a component and allow you to keep one piece of code that you can reuse over and over again, even in different layouts, and make it more reusable that way. So the IfEqual helper, this variable can be anything. So right now it's using layout, but we can create a type, we can create a style, we can name it anything, and as long as what it's pointing to matches, it will work. And next week I'll show you a more advanced example using if equals to make reusable components even more reusable. Another really useful helper is our repeat helper. So this is something that is specific to Panini, and it's really great for prototyping. Now, you may be able to use this in a production sense if you are injecting data into it, although in that case we have an each helper, which I'll show you in a little bit, which is a little bit more useful for that. So the repeat helper is great for prototyping in a sense that I have a repeatable component, I just want to print it out a bunch of times. So it's just going to save you time. So I have this card, and really this gallery of cards is supposed to be 9 or 12 deep. So instead of me copying and pasting this entire template just a bunch of times, I don't need to do that. I can just wrap it in a repeat. And it just keeps my code a lot simpler also while I'm working on it. So I'm just going to say hash repeat 12, wrap that in the thing that I am repeating, and we'll close that again with the / and save that. So after we close that, now we'll hop over to our example and see that now we have this card repeated multiple times. So this is just a quick time-saving thing while you're scaffolding, and it's a really helpful pattern that we use all the time. Now, you might actually need to write some kind of code sometimes in your pages. Maybe if you're writing a blog about how to do something in HTML or CSS or JavaScript. Well, Panini has a helper for that. It's called the code helper. So you just wrap your code in something like this, and then you'll paste your code right into this helper. So we paste that in, and now this will print out your code as if you wrapped it in pre and code tags. So really helpful for maybe a blog or something like that. And you can also write in Markdown. So if you want to write in Markdown in a certain section, Panini has a helper for that, and it'll allow you to do that. So we can go ahead and create the Markdown helper here. And close that. And then we'll put our Markdown right in here. So we have a title here, we have a bolded statement, and then a list. So Panini allows you to write in Markdown if you wrap it in the Markdown helper. So one more thing that might be really useful for you is if you need to escape any kind of other handlebars code, there's actually a raw helper built into Panini. So it looks like this. It's 4 handlebars, raw and raw. So now if you have any custom handlebar stuff that goes inside, then you can go ahead and wrap that inside of the raw helper, and basically Panini will pass it over, ignore it without processing it. So this is a really useful helper, the raw helper. You might need that if you're using some other handlebar system along with Panini. Alrighty, and now we're going to start looking at the each helper, which is actually made to be used with data. So the each helper iterates through sets of data or arrays or a list and allows you to print them out based on how much data you have. Now, data is really just content, and I'll show you what I mean right now. So let's take a simple example where we're going to create a menu. So we'll do UL with a class of menu. And now we're going to add some list items and some anchors. Okay, and we probably don't need the target there. And we'll make one link. So what we're going to do is use data to create a bunch of list items with the proper anchor tag location or the hypertext reference. And then we're also going to inject the text. So how are we going to do that? We're going to use the each helper in Panini. So we'll start with the each. Now actually we want this to be around the list item because that's the thing that we're going to repeat multiple times. So we'll start here. We have an errant bracket, so let's get rid of that and fix that. There we go. So we have each. Now we're going to name a variable. So we're going to say each nav. Okay, so each nav, and now we need to close this after the li. So again, slash, and then each. Okay, so now we have our each statement set up. So inside of UL with a class of menu, we're going to look for the data in the nav variable, and we have this list item that's going to be repeated. Now, we need to actually set up some of these parameters here. So what we need to do is create the link location. So we're going to use a variable here called link. And then we're going to use another variable here called, let's say, text. Okay, so we have our handlebars set up in this HTML. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create the data that's going to go into this section. So one way to do that is right now we're just pointing to a variable called nav. So we can go to one of our pages and we can use the data here. So I can say nav, and now I'm going to use this YAML syntax here to create my data list. So it's, you want to enter down to the next line and then use a dash, and then this creates my list or my array. So first thing is the link. So we created a variable for link, so now we're going to pass in a link there. And that's going to be, colon / something. Okay? And then we're going to move down to the next line and set our text. So again, we have a variable of text in our template for this navigation, and we're going to set the text. Now the text is just a word or something like that, so we'll set it up like this. So right now, if we did this, it would inject this URL and this text into the first list item, but it'll only create one list item because we have only one object here. So what we need to do is create some more objects. So we fill out this navigation. So again, we do the same setup. There we go. So let's go link, and then http:// test, something like that. And then we'll go ahead and make another text. All right. So if we save that, we can now go back to our index page example and see what comes up. All right, so hopping over to our example, we can see that the link was created here. So something and other. So if we inspect this, I expect to see the URL that I created there, and I do. So it says http://foo, and then the text something. All right, so this is clearly working the way that we expect it to. Now that's one way to do data. You can do the data right there in the front matter. But that's not as clean if you're doing site-wide data that's very reusable. So what we could do is actually make this a little bit cleaner. Now, it really depends on how much data you have. So data, again, is just content. So if you have a blog and you want to inject certain content into that, and you have a navigation, and you have other sorts of data, then you might want to create separate files. You don't have to. You can create one file. So right now we're doing a very simple site, so I'm going to name this file in the data folder to global. And you want to make sure that you have the proper file extension. So I'm calling it global.yaml or .yml. And that way it knows what type of content is being in here. So you can actually write this in JSON or YAML. So either way, it'll work. I prefer YAML. It's a little bit easier to understand. So I have my first variable here, which is nav, and now I put my links in here. So I'm going to skip ahead and add a bunch more links just so you can see how this works, and then I'll modify the template and we'll see what happens. Alright, so now I have a bunch of data in here. So we have links and different text, and this is in our global.yaml file. So under the nav variable. So now if I hop back over to my partial, we can see that it's pointing to a variable of nav. Now that's not going to work because we didn't define anything in the front matter. So it needs to point to the actual global file that we just created in the data folder. So if we go back to our component, and now we can name the file that it should look for. So the data file is named global. We put a dot in front of the variable to attach them together, and then the name of the variable, which is nav. So if we go back to the global file, you can see that this is the global file that we're pointing to, and the variable is nav. And then all the objects are inside of that. So if we hop back over to our example, you can see that that totally worked. So we have our entire navigation here with all the text and links that we set up being iterated through as many times as there are objects in that variable. So you see that there's an entire set of words here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If we hop back over to our global.yaml file, there are 9 pieces of data here. These are actual objects, so there's 9 of them. And so the each helper will iterate through as many as there are based on that one variable. So this is just a taste of all the really cool stuff that you can do with Panini's helpers and data. Next week, I'm going to show you some really amazing use cases, real life use cases, and more advanced use cases that we've used in real client projects to really speed our development, keep our files neat and organized, and then hand it off really professional code. So stay tuned for that. Alrighty, I can totally see you guys getting more powerful with this new information you just got. So next week we're gonna mix together all the things that we've learned and go through some advanced techniques using Panini. So if you don't wanna miss that, make sure you hit subscribe up above. That way the Yeti could get a new blanket for his hibernation. Now we also teach this in our advanced foundation class, plus a lot more like advanced SAS techniques, advanced JavaScript. So if you wanna check that out, I'll put the link below. And until next week, thanks everybody for watching.